I'm here to talk about Airbnb. For a long time, I haven't been a fan. There's a variety of reasons, but people are dropping out of the game, and I want to get to the bottom of what's going on, talk about how you might think about it if you're thinking about running the game. Maybe think a little differently. Let's learn from this other YouTuber who's actually in the Airbnb game. Let's see what she learned as she experienced the true fun that is Airbnb.
You saw the title right. I'm quitting Airbnb. No, it's not clickbait. It just doesn't make sense anymore. So today I'll get into why I'm quitting, what the last straw was.
Big question so far, right? Does Airbnb, did it ever make sense? Right? We're quitting now, but did it ever make sense? The first question I have is, why did people get into it? The first thing you think about with Airbnb, right? You're comparing a long-term rental, is what it had been historically, to a short-term rental. And in theory, if you could make more money by taking your property and renting it out for several nights, one night, a month, or whatever, as opposed to renting it to a long-term 12-month tenant, if you could make more money, that seems like a very smart decision, something we should all look at. As someone who owns a tremendous amount of rental property, there's probably very few people that would benefit as much as I would from doing this. Yet I didn't do it, and there's a specific reason we'll get to later. But let's see. So she's backing out now. But let's see what's causing Shelby to stop Airbnb now.
Was for me and what I'm planning on doing with this house now. As you guys know, hosting on Airbnb wasn't as profitable as I expected, but it was a generally good experience. But something changed recently, and it is the nail on the coffin for Airbnbs in California. It's a new bill that's introducing an additional 15% tax anytime you go to book an Airbnb in California. It's called SB 584, and they're rushing to get this into effect by 2025. So this is a big deal because anytime you go to book a hotel or a short-term rental, you're already taxed a transient occupancy tax, and it's usually around 10%. It's a little different in each city. You can see it's usually 10%. And this new unprecedented tax is on top of the transient occupancy tax. On its own, the TOT tax brings in a lot of money for Palm.
So let's look at what's going on here, right? Cities have lost revenue, right? Used to be hotels, right? When a business or person comes in, they stay at the hotel, right? That's one way a city makes money. They charge taxes on that. When you stay at a hotel, what also do you spend money on? Think of all the other places you pull out your credit card or cash. Where are you spending money? Right? You might be going to the bar or the restaurant or other places where if you're at Airbnb, you may not be out spending money on those same things. You may spend less. So cities are businesses. At the end of the day, they've got revenue and they've got expenses. And a lot of cities are cracking down on it. Now they're charging taxes, just one way they're going after it, right? The higher they make the tax, the less people that will book, the more people that might look at other options like renting it long term. So there's a couple issues here, right? Number one, cities are against it. There are some people that are against it. Think about the neighbors, right? Everyone loves going home to their house at night, kind of being like their sanctuary and getting some peace. Now, if there's two ragers in both sides of your house goes from a sanctuary to somewhere that's running like your house is now in the middle of two other places. You're running like it's like a hotel's on both sides of you and your house is tucked in the middle. It's something that may or may not make sense, right? So you've got the city issue, you've got the neighbor issue, and then you've got all the liability of really running a hotel in a house. And there's a zoning issue here, right? California is coming at it from a tax standpoint. But let's see what else is really driving this.
Springs. In 2023, it's estimated to be about $50 million. So hotels and short-term rentals bring in a ton of money for our city. It's the biggest revenue source. And additionally, Airbnbs are taxed on any profit that they make as well. So it's not like Airbnbs aren't paying taxes. But still, SB 584 is presenting a tax like I've never seen before, like higher than the TOT tax. That's kind of wild. So this is good news to a lot of people because I know a lot of you guys hate Airbnb. And I get it. The tax money is to go towards building affordable housing units. Currently, the city only spends $3 million of their budget on an affordable housing reserve. Most of the money goes to general government and the police. It all sounds really great in theory, but will it actually work? And what am I gonna do with my house? Let's get into it. First, we need to look at how this affects if you were to book my house. Right now in November, it's kind of the slower season, so it's $575 a night. You end up paying $328 in taxes, so the reservation total is around $3,300. Now in 2025, when this whole thing goes into effect, it's gonna make it so that the taxes you pay are $749. So the total reservation goes from $3,300 to $3,745. The amount that you're paying in taxes is now more than the amount that you'd be paying for one night staying here. That's crazy. And the thing is, hotels don't have to enforce this tax. So whenever you go to California and stay in a hotel, you just pay the TOT tax, which is usually around 10%, depends on the city. So if you're a group of like 4 friends, I just don't see why you would ever stay in an Airbnb. It doesn't make sense. You're automatically gonna get a 15% discount by staying in a hotel. I mean, if I was looking to book a place in Palm Springs and I didn't own my house, I wouldn't book it. I would not book it if I had to pay 15% more. Like, are you crazy? Who would do that? Unless you absolutely...
So let's look at what's really going on here, right? The reason why they have to charge this tax is because someone has to enforce the laws and regulations. Again, we talked about cities, right? They have a certain amount of revenue. The city was not collecting revenue for code enforcement for Airbnbs. Now, all the cities across the country, there's tons and tons of complaints. If you go to the news articles, you're going to see tons of articles about all of the complaints out there. I've got a cabin in the mountains, and there's a cabin across the way from me that has an Airbnb in it. There's nothing wrong with Airbnb. I have no problem with someone making money. Where I have a challenge is that house is about 4,000 square feet, and I have seen 35 people over there in a rager numerous times, and I didn't buy a cabin in the mountains as a sanctuary to be next to a hotel. If I bought next to a Marriott or I bought next to another hotel, I totally get that, but I didn't. I bought in a golf community, not next to a nightclub like Mist or Steam or Precipitation or something really, really cool. I didn't do that. And so I think you're going to see lots and lots of folks push back, and that they're going to have there's going to be lots more regulation come out. But I want to follow up on this tax issue in California. And I'm going to talk about other cities and states are handling the same issue.
Absolutely need a house and you need the privacy. Maybe you're like a 6-person group, but it just does not make sense. Keep in mind, this is a bill that is being passed all across California. It's not just Palm Springs. So if you're ever going to book an Airbnb in San Diego in 2025, I mean, just look at hotels. Just don't even bother anymore. Honestly, that's my thoughts on it. So for me, this is the last straw. I think it'll just make it too tough to compete with hotels. But I'm actually not selling my house. I came up with a different plan for a number of reasons, and that is to turn it into a long-term rental. That is my plan in 2025. I'm 99% sure at this point that that's what I'm gonna do, although I will take the first month or 2 of the year and see how it is. I'll see if people are still booking, but I just don't think it makes sense. Like, I don't even...
Here's the reality, Shelby. It never made sense because we accounted for your time as free. There's 2 calculations that every Airbnb owner aren't making. Number 1, you bought a house, you went out and furnished it. You bought a couch, a bed, all this furniture, artwork, all these things that you bought and provided. And what I would love to understand from every Airbnb owner, what percentage of your nightly revenue are you allocating or putting towards replacement? Like, we know that couch is not going to be used the same as your couch at home because there's going to be a lot more people and they're probably going to be a little rougher on it than maybe you are in your couch at home. So what percentage of your nightly revenue do you think you should allocate for all the fixtures and furniture over time? If you look at the really well done hotels that allow you to own a building inside of it, typically they take about 8% of the nightly rent. They put that in a pool of money and they go back, and once they've got enough funds, they, over 3 or 4 years or whatever period of time, they're going to basically throw away all of the furniture inside of it and replace all of it because they collected that 8% until they used up that expense, right? So that money was collected. They had enough to replace it all, and now they get rid of everything, and they're going to make it all new and nice so that the guests enjoy it, and it's all in the right condition so the guests come in there. The other issue is time. I don't know that Shelby or other Airbnb owners are actually allocating how much time they spend. For a really successful entrepreneur, when you're doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing in your business, typically your time's worth hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars per hour. However, it's really easy to not think about the time you're spending managing, booking, cleaning, and doing all the things in your Airbnb. But if you had 10 or 20 or 100 of these, you would have to have an army of staff doing those things for you, and that might crush your profitability. So it's one of those things, there's an opportunity cost on your time and always on your money. In this case, it's on your time. So when you're spending your time managing an Airbnb, you're not spending that time going out and building your business, increasing your skills, or trying to grow your income. So you've always got to factor in that time and then go back and calculate the cost per hour of what you would have to hire someone to actually do the same thing you did, and then see how that affects your profitability. So when you run that math, you should compare that to the long-term rental, which is what Shelby's about to do. And when she does that math, what she's going to find out is that the long-term rental wins almost every single time. The counter to that will be, oh, I had a month where I crushed it, or the Super Bowl was in my city, or F1 or some insane event came into my city and I was able to make $15,000 that month on my Airbnb. But yeah, what was the off month? Like in Arizona, when it's the temperature here is about the surface of the sun and it's 120 degrees, people aren't flocking to our city to come in here to stay at an Airbnb. Right. So, but now don't get me wrong, during the winter months when we've got the waste management open and we've got things going on, yeah, it's a time where people come in, so you get higher rents. We need to look at an annual budget. What did this thing produce annually after we factor in your time, the correct allocations to replace the furniture and fixtures, and all of that? And you take that and you be comparing it against a long-term rental. My view is that long-term rentals win every single time.
I don't want to encourage people to pay that much in taxes when they can just go to a hotel. It's going to be cheaper to get a couple hotel rooms for you and your friends, you know? So turning it into a long-term rental makes a lot more sense. You might be like, now why not sell it? Number one reason is because I love this house. I put so much work into it, and I also love Palm Springs. I could see myself maybe retiring here one day. So I don't want to let go of it when I already have this house and have put so much work into it and have locked in this low interest rate and all this, you know, no, I don't want to sell it. It's not purely an investment to me. I actually would like to use it again. It really just does not make sense to sell financially right now.
Reason number 3 that Shelby led me to, right? She's making an emotional decision, then trying to apply logic to it, right? I don't want to sell because I did so much work and I spent so much time, and maybe down the road in some faraway land, I'd love to live there and hang out. Yeah, let's go figure that out then. Today, when you're investing your money, you're actually trying to make money from your money. That is the only purpose. Hard work, enthusiasm, and hopes and dreams are not measurable economics, and we can't get return on investment from those things. Right. So when you have a property, if you're taking your capital and you're choosing to place it into real estate, you have to think about the opportunity cost on that money. We talked about the opportunity cost on your time, the opportunity cost on your money, because she could have done something else with it. Right. She could have placed that into a note or a hard money loan or some other asset. And instead she placed it here. So saying, I really don't want to sell because I really don't care about the money because I put so much work into it. That's the old poker term, right? You're pot committed. You're playing Jack 8 offsuit, and you've already put so much money in the pot, you should have been in the hand anyway. Poker analogy, a lot like this. She shouldn't be in the game.
I would just pay so much in capital gains taxes, and then I would go to buy something and I wouldn't even be able to get anything as good because the interest rates are so high. It doesn't really make sense to sell. But long-term renting it turns out, is looking like it would be quite profitable. Probably more profitable than Airbnb ever was, actually. I actually met one of my neighbors recently, and he told me that he turned his Airbnb into a long-term rental, and he's making more. He's making more because you don't have to pay all the expenses. You don't have to pay for the utilities. Simply Safe, YouTube TV, the insane electric bill, the gas bill. Instead, the tenant pays for what they want and what they use. And the mortgage for my house right now, it's $3,200 a month. And Redfin and Zillow think I could rent this long-term for $6,200 a month. So if you guys haven't followed along with the Airbnb journey, you know I'm just barely breaking even. So to be making $2,000 a month in cash flow, now I'm skeptical if that's actually possible, but we'll see. That would be way better than doing Airbnb. Plus I wouldn't have to deal with all of that.
Okay, there's a lot going down. We got to break this in here. First of all, getting into an investment to try on the hope, if everything goes right, to break even is the worst strategy. If you look at what happened in 2008, 9, and 10, what caused the downturn, it was speculation. People were buying homes, letting them sit vacant, and hoping that they would just go up in value and they would sell them doing nothing. It's almost similar. In that case, they're just eating all the mortgage and costs. Airbnb, to try to buy an investment to break even, is no one's strategy ever, right? People run into Airbnb because it sounds like business and it is fun. Right? But that's not a game. If you want a hobby, there's lots of great ones out there. Go paint, go get into horseback riding, or go get into something else. But the game of money is all about understanding opportunity cost, return on investment, and how it's actually performing. Breaking even is dumb. You should not be doing it. If you've got investments like this that don't work, you should be thinking differently. Also, look into the long-term rental. I would say one thing I can almost with certainty, I doubt that place rents for $6,500 a month. Unless that home is a $1 to $2 million home, that's not going to rent for $6,500 a month. My guess from looking at it's going to rent for about $5,000 a month. Most rentals have what's called an expense load. That's all of the expenses added up, and you divide that against the monthly rent. That's going to be taxes, insurance, management, vacancy, and we assume it's going to be vacant 1 month every year on a long-term basis. And we're also going to take repairs. We assume 1 month's rent we'll use in repairs throughout the year. If you landlord really, really well, you should have your tenants should average, my tenants average about 33 or 34 months on average. On repairs, it is hard to get to 1 month's repairs throughout the year, but it's a good number for you to target. So when Shelby's looking at this, she needs to look at, can she cash flow and create at least $500 per month on a property this size? I would want to get a minimum of $500 a month, probably more like $1,000 a month in cash flow after all expenses on a long-term basis. If not, she should look at actually selling this property.
The hassles that come with running an Airbnb, it's really not that bad, but you do think about it a lot, and there's always stuff that comes up that you need to be repurchasing, and with a long-term rental, there's a lot less of that. Additionally, just on a personal note, my parents live here in Palm Springs now, and my sister and her boyfriend also bought a house here, so I tend to just visit them and stay with them now than even use this house anyway, so I don't really care as much about having it as like a partial use vacation home. So here are my own personal thoughts on this bill, even though nobody asked. I'm gonna give them to you anyway. So this bill is to provide funding for affordable housing for the labor force. And honestly, if it does that and everything works out according to plan, I think that's great. Like, of course, we need more affordable housing and teachers should be able to afford a house. I think we all agree with that. I think the issue is, I genuinely don't think it's going to do that. California makes a lot of money in taxes to begin with. It's estimated they're gonna bring 130 billion with a B in income taxes alone for 2022. So that's not to mention property taxes, sales tax. So I don't think the issue is funding. I think the money is there to build affordable housing. It's been there. California has always made a ton of money. It's just not ever being spent in the right way. And I don't wanna get too much into this, but like clearly it's not. If we don't have affordable housing now, when we have so much money going to the government here, I personally think it's not fair to put the entire brunt of the lack of affordable housing on short-term rentals when so many things affect it. It's zoning laws, it's the fact that there's no incentives to build, so there's not enough new construction. It's the people who are landlords that own 10 to 100 units and just are hoarding those forever. Like, short-term rentals are a relatively new thing, and we've had an affordable housing problem long before short-term rentals. I think some people think that if everybody quits Airbnb, suddenly housing is going to be affordable, but it's not, because there's so many things that affect the housing market. I think what we're actually going to see happen is the city's going to bring in less revenue. There's going to be probably less Airbnbs. The reality of Palm Springs, and a lot of people don't want to hear this, but this is the truth about Palm Springs. Most of these homes are second houses. They're second houses for rich people. They're used for a few months of the year, and then the people who own them go back to Canada or Chicago or wherever they came from. It would be great if they can build more affordable housing, but I want to see the plan of how they're going to do it. There is no plan. I looked through the whole bill. There's no specific plans of how they're going to spend the money. I even reached out to the office of the senator that wrote it to interview her about it. They seemed interested actually in an interview, but then they ended up not responding. At this point, I can't actually tell if this thing has passed or not. I'm not here to convince you to vote on anything, because this actually isn't a bill that we as citizens can vote on. All in all, I don't love this bill. Of course, I'm biased as a short-term rental owner, but I also think it's just going to discourage people from traveling to Palm Springs. A lot of my guests are from out of state. They're from places that are really cold. Chicago, Oregon, Canada. And if they're having to pay 26% in taxes for a house, I actually think they might go to Florida or something. Let's be real, California probably already has the money for affordable housing. They just never allocate it to that. A reality, whichever comes first.
Okay, we got a lot going on here. Airbnb is likely, there is an argument on long-term housing, on affordable housing. I don't see that that's going to fix it. I agree with her comments there. That being said, I think not having Airbnbs and have those available for long-term rentals do provide a version of affordable housing, right? We need to figure out lower cost construction methods, and there's some really cool things coming down the pipe that will help with that. That being said, you're not going to see, just because Airbnb goes away, that's not going to solve long-term housing, but it does create more long-term rentals available for people that need those. So there is some merit there. You also got to look at, there's a bunch of things happening in other cities. They're putting pressure. We'll get to those in a second. But let's get Shelby's final thoughts on what she's thinking here.
Up new houses all the time because it's easier to. And if they made it a little bit easier to here, streamline the permit process, make it faster, easier, cheaper, to build, then it's just simple supply and demand. There would be a lot more houses. If we have an ample housing supply, then they just become more affordable by default. All right, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video and learned something. Comment down below what your thoughts are on this bill. I would love to read it. We can have a discussion in the comments. Let's do that. And I will see you guys in my next video.
Last thought here that no one talks about in Airbnb. Without regulation, like many things, it's a race to the bottom. I'll give you an example. Let's pretend I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona. Scottsdale is one of our most desirable cities, and I've got an Airbnb there, and I've got the only one, right? I can charge a lot for rent, right? It's a simple supply and demand. There's no supply. There's a lot of demand. I can charge a very, very high price. Now assume 100 people come in and do the same. My price I got before is not going to be as high because now there's more supply. The demand is the same, so my price would come down. Now assume there's 10,000 or 100,000. What you see is it's a race to the bottom. So you see a bunch of people that are charging $500 a night. And when it doesn't rent out and they have to make their mortgage and they have to buy another couch and they have to do all these things, what's the next thing they do? They lower their price to $450. Well, the next person comes along and lowers it to $400, and the next person's at $350, and the next person's at $300. And it's a race all the way down. And they're using something called the greater fool theory. The person's at the $300, the next fool comes in at $250, and he doesn't realize that he's not going to make any money, or he or she, because they can't actually do math. Math is the thing that should guide your decisions, right? So you've got to look at, what is my occupancy rate? If I was going to have an Airbnb, which I do not, I would want to know what's the average occupancy. I would build in a conservative estimate to be beneath that. If my average occupancy was 75%, I would assume I'm only going to get 60%. I would have all of the real costs. I would want to have, what percentage of my revenue should I allocate to capital improvements and furniture and fixture as it wears out? I'd also want to look at what's going on with regulations. Could I be put out of business? And most importantly, the last thing I should be looking at is, if I rented this long term, if I use another strategy, does it still make sense to buy it? If the only way your investment works in Airbnb, I don't think the game will work long term. I think you've got some risk. Let's take a look and see what these other cities are doing here. So here's New York, an article from, where is this from? Housing Wire, from Wired Magazine. New York's Airbnb ban is descending into pure chaos. So New York came out, they passed a ban where they want to make everything, I believe it's 30-day minimum, or you've got to actually live in the property and be there with your guests, like you could rent out a room. So they want 30 days or longer, right? So New York is really cracking down. You go in here, it's long been the law of the state of New York that residential apartments cannot be rented out for less than 30 days under very limited circumstances. So just Airbnb was just skirting the law. This law's been there before. And you could go, here's someone here is actually anti-Airbnb, and she's Airbnb's official party pooper, right? She's reduced partying by 55% in 2 years. Why is this coming out? Again, neighbors don't want to have an Airbnb next to them, right? They didn't sign up for that. Here's Texas, Dallas. They're putting a ban, and they're trying to do the same thing, and they're trying to push that up. There's a bunch of debate here. They're trying to get as long as 6 months being the minimum. They'll probably land at 30 days. That's likely what's to happen. So what's my predictions? I think you're going to see, number one, a lot of people getting out of Airbnb, because when they actually learn the math, when the world gets a little more tough, they're going to realize that maybe this doesn't make as much sense. All the annoyance and calls I'm getting doesn't make sense. And they might look at moving that more to a long-term rental. I also think you're going to have pressure from your neighbors and other things. People are going to get tired of it. And lastly, you're going to see the cities creating regulation. My advice to you, if you have one, run the math and see if your property works as a long-term rental. Run the math I gave you and go out and see if something happened with Airbnb, could you move it to a long-term rental and make money? Also, the housing market's still relatively strong as we're filming this right now. You could actually sell it and likely make money. There could either pay the tax if you've owned it over a year, they've got 20% on long-term gains tax, or you could 1031 exchange that and move that into investment that might create a lot more cash flow. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you had an Airbnb? Have you compared it to a long-term rental? I would love to know why you chose it, why you're still doing it. And if you're crushing it, put that in here too. I love being proved wrong.